Somewhere in the stillness between waking and dreaming, you've arrived here. Perhaps the day has folded itself away, or maybe you're seeking something beyond the ordinary rhythm of hours. Either way, this moment is yours. Tonight, we trace a thread that stretches back through countless generations, a story written not in words, but in footsteps, in seeds planted, in ships that dared the horizon. If you find comfort in these wanderings through time, consider subscribing to the Quiet Science channel. It helps others discover this quiet corner of wonder, one restful mind at a time. Let us begin with a simple truth. You are here, reading or listening to these words, because of the longest, quietest revolution in history. Not a revolution of noise and upheaval, but one of small steps repeated across millennia. The story of how humans became a global civilization is not a tale of kings and conquerors alone, though they appear in its pages. It is the story of farmers and sailors, scribes and merchants, travelers and dreamers, each adding their thread to a fabric now woven across every corner of the earth. This is the quiet story of us, the beginning, our African origins. If you were to trace your ancestry back far enough, through generations beyond counting, through landscapes that no longer exist, through climates that have shifted and changed, you would eventually arrive in Africa. Not the Africa of nations and borders as we know them today, but a wilder, older version of the continent where grasslands stretched endlessly beneath vast skies, where rivers carved their way through ancient rock, and where something remarkable was happening. Between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago, in various places across this continent, a new kind of human was emerging. Scientists call our species Homo sapiens, meaning wise human, though wisdom is a quality we've had to grow into over many thousands of years. We were not the first humans. Our evolutionary cousins had walked the earth long before us. Homo erectus had journeyed out of Africa nearly 2 million years earlier, spreading across much of the ancient world. Neanderthals thrived in Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans inhabited parts of Eastern Asia. But Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, were different in subtle but important ways. Our brains were slightly larger, our bodies more slender, and built for endurance rather than raw strength. But perhaps most importantly, we possessed something that would change everything. We developed language in its fullest sense, complex and flexible, capable of expressing not just immediate needs, but abstract concepts, plans for the future, stories of the past, and ideas that existed only in imagination. With language came the ability to cooperate in new ways, to teach and learn across generations, to build shared understanding of the world. Early Homo sapiens lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following the migrations of animals, gathering plants, nuts, and roots. They crafted tools from stone, shaping flakes with remarkable precision to create sharp edges for cutting, scraping, and piercing. They controlled fire, not just capturing it when lightning struck, but creating it deliberately, using it for warmth, protection, cooking, and light. Fire transformed night into a time for storytelling and social bonding. Around those ancient flames, human culture began to take shape. These early humans were not living in some primitive darkness, waiting for civilization to dawn. They had rich lives, complex social structures, deep knowledge of their environment. A hunter-gatherer needed to know which plants were edible and which were poison, when animals would migrate and where they would go. how to track prey across vast distances by reading subtle signs in earth and grass, how to work together to bring down creatures far larger and stronger than any individual human. This knowledge, accumulated over generations and passed down through language and demonstration, was sophisticated and essential for survival. The archaeological record from Africa reveals tantalizing glimpses of this early humanity. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, researchers discovered ochre pieces engraved with geometric patterns, dated to around 70,000 years ago. These are among the earliest known examples of symbolic thinking, of humans creating meaning beyond the purely practical. Beads made from shells, carefully perforated for stringing, suggest personal adornment and perhaps the beginnings of art and self-expression. Cave paintings, though more common in Europe and dating to later periods, have African counterparts that speak to the universal human impulse to leave marks, to say, "We were here, we saw this, we thought and felt and created." But Africa, despite its richness, was not infinite. Climate fluctuated dramatically during the Pleistocene epoch, the great ice age that gripped the planet. When times were good, when rains fell and grasslands flourished, populations grew. But when drought came, when resources became scarce, humans had to make choices. Some stayed, adapting to harsher conditions. Others moved, following rivers, tracking game, searching for better lands. And so began the Great Migrations, the journeys that would eventually carry humanity to every habitable corner of the globe. Our species, born in Africa, would not remain there. The restless gene, the curiosity that pushes beyond the next hill to see what lies there, the adaptability that allows survival in new and challenging environments, these drove humans outward in waves across tens of thousands of years. We did not know we were embarking on a journey that would span continents and millennia. We were simply moving, one generation at a time, following the ancient imperatives of survival and curiosity that are woven into our very being. Africa remains, in the deepest sense, the homeland of all humanity. Every person alive, today, regardless of where they call home, carries in their genetic code the markers of African origin. We are all, ultimately, Africans who have been away from home for a very long time. The diversity we see in human populations today, the variations in appearance and culture, emerged as different groups adapted to wildly different environments over thousands of generations. But beneath that diversity lies a fundamental unity. We are one species, one human family, with roots that reach back to the savannas and forests of Africa. In those origins lies something profound. Before there were nations or civilizations, before there were different languages or religions, before all the divisions that sometimes separate us today, there was simply humanity, learning to survive, to cooperate, to dream. That original unity, that shared ancestry, echoes down through all the millennia since. When we look at each other across whatever divides we perceive, we are looking at distant cousins, family separated by geography and time, but linked by bonds that go deeper than any surface differences. Africa gave humanity its start, but the story was just beginning, and the world awaited, vast and unknown, ready to be discovered and shaped by these clever, adaptable, restless creatures who had learned to walk upright, to think symbolically, to speak, to dream, and to wonder what lay beyond the horizon. The Great Migration, spreading across the globe. The Earth, between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, was a vastly different place than the world we inhabit today. Ice sheets kilometers thick covered much of North America and Northern Europe. Sea levels stood more than 100 meters lower than they do now, exposing vast stretches of land that have since been claimed by the rising oceans. Coastlines ran along routes now deep underwater. Islands were connected to mainlands, and continents were linked by land bridges that would later vanish beneath the waves. It was during this time, in this transformed landscape, that humans began their great dispersal out of Africa. This was not a single exodus, not one dramatic departure, but rather a series of migrations spanning tens of thousands of years, driven by climate shifts, population pressures, and that eternal human impulse to see what lies beyond the known world. The timing and routes of these migrations have been reconstructed through a combination of archaeological evidence, genetic studies, and climate modeling. The story that emerges is complex and fascinating, full of false starts and lost populations, of groups that ventured forth only to disappear, and of other groups whose descendants would eventually populate the entire planet. One of the earliest routes out of Africa led through the Sinai Peninsula and into the Levant, the region of the Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological sites in Israel, dated to around 180,000 years ago, contain tools and fossils that appear to be Homo sapiens. But these early pioneers may not have persisted. The fossil record suggests they were eventually replaced by Neanderthal populations, which were already well established in the region. These early attempts at expansion were experiments, trials that did not lead to lasting settlement. The breakthrough came later, possibly around 100,000 years ago, with migrations that would prove more successful. One route followed the coast of the Arabian Peninsula. Today, this region is largely desert, one of the harshest environments on Earth. But during certain periods, when Earth's orbit shifted slightly and monsoons strengthened, the Arabian Peninsula transformed. Rainfall increased, rivers flowed, and lakes formed in areas now utterly dry. Archaeological evidence reveals the presence of these ancient water sources. Stone tools have been found near dried lake beds, marking the passage of humans through landscapes that were once green and fertile. These climate-driven windows of opportunity, occurring roughly every 20,000 years, aligned with Earth's axial precession, the slow wobble of our planet's spin. When conditions allowed, humans moved through what scientists call green corridors, following the water and the animals and plants that depended on it. When drought returned and the corridors closed, populations became isolated, some perhaps dying out, others persisting until the next window opened. From the Arabian Peninsula, some groups moved northeast into Mesopotamia and beyond, eventually reaching Central Asia. Others moved southeast along the coasts of the Indian Ocean, following a maritime route that would carry them all the way to Southeast Asia and eventually to Australia. This coastal migration may have been facilitated by the humans' growing mastery of seafaring. Even simple rafts or canoes would have allowed island hopping, opening up routes that would have been impossible by land alone. The genetic evidence confirms these migration patterns. All non-African populations share certain genetic markers that trace back to a single population that left Africa, probably between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago. This was the successful dispersal, the great wave that would populate the world. But within this larger pattern, smaller patterns emerge. Different groups split off at different times, moved in different directions, encountered different environments and challenges. By 60,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia, crossing stretches of open ocean that required deliberate seafaring, not accidental drift. This remarkable achievement speaks to the cognitive sophistication and technological capability of these early humans. They were not just following coastlines, but actively navigating, planning journeys that would carry them beyond sight of land. In Asia, humans encountered their evolutionary cousins. Neanderthals occupied much of Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans lived in the high altitudes of Tibet and eastern regions. These were not meetings between radically different species, but between closely related populations that had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. And these meetings led to interbreeding. Modern humans outside Africa carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, typically 1 to 4%. People in Melanesia and parts of Asia carry Denisovan DNA. These genetic contributions suggest complex interactions, periods of coexistence, exchange, and integration rather than simple replacement. Europe saw the arrival of Homo sapiens around 45,000 years ago. These migrants entered a land already inhabited by Neanderthals, who had adapted to the cold climate with stocky builds, large nasal cavities to warm frigid air, and sophisticated tool technologies. For thousands of years, the two populations coexisted, leaving their marks in adjacent archaeological layers. Eventually, Neanderthals disappeared, their last known populations dating to around 40,000 years ago. The reasons remain debated. Did Homo sapiens outcompete them for resources? Did climate shifts favor one species over the other? Did disease play a role? Or was it simply absorption, with small Neanderthal populations gradually merging into the larger Homo sapiens population through interbreeding? The answer likely involves some combination of all these factors. The last major migration carried humans across the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. During the last glacial maximum, around 25,000 to 15,000 years ago, ice sheets locked up so much water that sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing a vast plain between Siberia and Alaska. This region, called Beringia, was not covered by glaciers despite its high latitude. It was a cold but habitable steppe environment, supporting mammoths, horses, bison, and other large mammals, as well as the humans who hunted them. The exact timing of the entry into the Americas remains actively researched and occasionally contentious. Footprints discovered in New Mexico have been dated to around 23,000 years ago, suggesting an earlier arrival than previously thought. By 15,000 years ago, humans had definitely spread south through ice-free corridors and along coastal routes, reaching the southern tip of South America by around 14,000 years ago. In just a few thousand years, humans had populated 2 entire continents, adapting to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest to high mountain plateaus to temperate grasslands. This global dispersal was not a purposeful conquest. No one set out thinking, "I will populate the earth." Instead, it was the cumulative result of countless individual and group decisions, repeated across generations. A group follows game animals into a new valley. Another group moves to avoid conflict with neighbors. A drought forces relocation. Curiosity drives exploration of what lies beyond the next river. Population growth pushes groups to seek new territories. Each move is small, often just a few dozen kilometers. But over centuries and millennia, these small moves add up. What made this global expansion possible was human adaptability, both biological and cultural. We could survive in the tropics and the Arctic, in deserts and rainforests. We learned to hunt everything from mammoths to fish to birds. We learned which local plants were edible and which were toxic. We invented new tools suitable for local materials and prey. We developed clothing from animal skins to protect against cold, shelters adapted to local conditions, fire techniques that worked with available fuel. This adaptability, particularly cultural adaptability, the ability to learn and pass on new knowledge, is perhaps the defining characteristic of our species. By 10,000 years ago, humans had reached virtually every habitable land area on Earth. The only major regions we had not settled were remote oceanic islands that would require advanced seafaring to reach, and Antarctica, which would remain uninhabited until the modern era of exploration. From origins in Eastern Africa, humanity had become a truly global species, present on every continent save one. But being globally distributed did not mean being globally connected. The populations that had spread across the earth were now separated by vast distances and formidable barriers. Groups in Australia had no contact with groups in South America. Europeans had no knowledge of East Asia. These isolated populations developed independently, creating distinct languages, cultures, technologies, and ways of life. For thousands of years, most humans lived and died without ever encountering anyone from significantly different cultural or genetic backgrounds. The Great Migrations had scattered humanity across the globe. The next chapter in our story would involve, slowly and fitfully, the reconnection of these scattered populations, the building of bridges across the distances that separated them. But before that could happen, another revolution was brewing, one that would transform human society even more profoundly than the migrations had. This revolution would not involve movement through space, but rather a different kind of change: the decision to stop moving, to settle down, to plant seeds and wait for harvest. The agricultural revolution was about to begin. The agricultural revolution, learning to stay still. For more than 90% of human history, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. They moved with the seasons, following herds of animals, harvesting wild plants when they ripened, fishing in rivers and along coasts. Their lives were not easy, but neither were they the brutish struggle for survival often imagined. Hunter-gatherers typically worked fewer hours than later agricultural peoples. They had diverse diets, intimate knowledge of their environments, and strong social bonds. Their populations remained relatively small and mobile, taking only what they needed from the land and moving on before resources were depleted. But around 12,000 years ago, something remarkable began to happen in several regions around the world, apparently independently. People began to experiment with a radically different way of life. Instead of following food, they started producing it. They planted seeds, tended growing plants, and waited for harvest. They captured young animals and kept them, breeding them generation after generation. They built permanent structures and stayed in one place through the seasons. They became farmers. This transformation, called the Neolithic Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution, was one of the most consequential changes in human history. It would lead to population growth, the rise of cities, the development of complex civilizations, and ultimately to the interconnected global society we live in today. But it did not happen overnight. It did not happen everywhere at once. And it was not an unmixed blessing. The earliest evidence for agriculture appears in the Fertile Crescent, a region stretching from the Mediterranean coast through modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and into western Iran. This crescent-shaped area was blessed with wild ancestors of many plants that would become staple crops: wheat, barley, lentils, peas, and chickpeas. It also hosted wild sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. Around 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, people in this region began deliberately planting seeds and managing these animals. The transition was gradual. At first, people might have simply protected wild stands of useful plants, discouraging other animals from eating them, clearing competing vegetation. They harvested seeds and scattered them in favorable locations. Over generations, they began selecting seeds from plants with desirable traits, larger grains, stalks that did not shatter and scatter seeds before harvest, fewer bitter compounds. This unconscious and later conscious selection pressure led to domestication, the genetic modification of wild species into forms more useful and dependent on human cultivation. Similar processes were happening with animals. Young animals captured from wild herds could be tamed if raised from infancy. Those with more docile temperaments were easier to manage and more likely to survive and breed in captivity. Over generations, domesticated animals became genetically distinct from their wild ancestors, often smaller, with different coat colors, more tolerant of human presence, and dependent on humans for food and protection. The Fertile Crescent was not the only center of agricultural development. In China, millet and rice were domesticated in the Yellow River and Yangtze River valleys, starting around 9,000 years ago. In the highlands of New Guinea, people began cultivating taro and other root crops. In Mesoamerica, around 8,000 years ago, people domesticated corn, beans, and squash. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa were brought under cultivation. In sub-Saharan Africa, people domesticated sorghum, African rice, and yams. These multiple independent developments of agriculture suggest that once human populations reached certain sizes and environmental conditions were right, the shift to food production became almost inevitable. But why did this shift happen at all? Hunter-gathering had sustained humans for hundreds of thousands of years. Why change? Scholars have proposed many theories. One suggests that climate change at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, created conditions favorable for agriculture. As temperatures warmed and ice sheets retreated, new environments emerged. In some areas, wild grains became more abundant, making it worthwhile to harvest, store, and eventually cultivate them. Another theory suggests that population growth drove the change. As hunter-gatherer populations increased, competition for wild resources intensified. Some groups responded by deliberately increasing food supplies through cultivation and herding. Agriculture could support far more people per unit of land than hunting and gathering, though at the cost of harder work and less diverse diets. A third perspective suggests that agriculture was not adopted because it made life better, but because once a group started down that path, they became locked in. Early agricultural communities likely experienced boom and bust cycles. When harvests were good, populations grew. But agricultural populations were vulnerable to crop failures, and larger populations needed more food. Groups could not easily return to hunter-gathering because their larger numbers would overburden wild resources, and knowledge of how to live as hunter-gatherers might have been lost. They were trapped by their own success. Whatever the initial motivations, agriculture spread. Sometimes it spread through the migration of farming peoples into new territories, displacing or absorbing hunter-gatherers. Other times, hunter-gatherers adopted farming techniques from neighbors or independently innovated similar practices. The spread was not uniform or inevitable. Many groups continued hunting and gathering for thousands of years, and some continue to this day. But in regions where environmental conditions favored it, agriculture increasingly became the dominant mode of subsistence. The effects of agriculture on human society were profound and far-reaching. Most obviously, agriculture allowed and required permanent settlement. Farmers needed to stay near their fields to plant, tend, and harvest crops. They built more substantial homes, invested in storage facilities for grain, and created villages. These settlements grew over time as agricultural techniques improved and could support more people. Agricultural life also changed social structures. Hunter-gatherer societies tended to be relatively egalitarian. Everyone contributed to food, procurement, and there was limited opportunity for individuals to accumulate wealth or power. But agricultural societies produced surplus food beyond immediate needs. Some people could specialize in activities other than food production, making tools, building structures, organizing trade, performing religious rituals, or governing. Societies became more hierarchical, with distinct classes of farmers, artisans, priests, and rulers. The agricultural revolution was also a demographic revolution. Hunter-gatherer populations were limited by the need for mobility. Women in such societies typically gave birth only every 3 to 4 years, as carrying multiple small children while moving camps was impractical. But settled agricultural life allowed for more closely spaced births. Infant survival rates may have improved with stable shelter and stored food. Agricultural populations grew rapidly, soon vastly outnumbering the remaining hunter-gatherers. However, agriculture was not an unqualified improvement in quality of life. Studies of skeletal remains reveal that early agricultural populations were often less healthy than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They were shorter in stature, showing signs of nutritional stress. Their diets, heavily dependent on a few staple crops, lacked the diversity of wild foods. They suffered from new diseases, both from living in close proximity to domesticated animals, which served as disease reservoirs, and from living in larger, denser communities where infections could spread more easily. Tooth decay increased dramatically as diets became richer in carbohydrates from grains. Agricultural work was also more labor-intensive than hunting and gathering. Clearing land, plowing fields, planting, weeding, irrigating, harvesting, processing grain, these tasks required long hours of repetitive physical labor. Farmers worked harder for less dietary diversity and poorer health than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Yet despite these costs, agriculture continued to spread and intensify. The reason may be demographic. Agricultural populations, despite poorer health, grew faster than hunter-gatherer populations. When agricultural and hunter-gatherer groups competed for land, the agricultural groups often prevailed simply through weight of numbers. Natural selection, in this case, favored the reproductive strategy that produced more offspring, even if those offspring were less healthy as individuals. Agriculture also enabled accumulation, not just of food, but of material possessions, knowledge, and cultural complexity. Permanent settlements meant that objects did not need to be portable. Pottery, which was too heavy and fragile for nomadic life, became common in agricultural communities, allowing better storage and cooking. Weaving produced textiles beyond the immediate production of clothing. Metallurgy emerged, first with native copper and gold, later with the smelting of copper from ore, and eventually with the revolutionary alloy bronze, combining copper and tin. Surplus food and specialized labor created the conditions for monumental architecture and complex political organization. When agricultural yields exceeded the needs of the farmers, Those surpluses could be extracted through taxation or tribute to support non-farming classes. Temples were built to honor gods and ancestors. Palaces housed rulers. Defensive walls protected communities. Irrigation systems channeled water to fields, requiring coordinated labor and maintenance. All of this required organization, leadership, and the ability to mobilize large numbers of people toward common goals. The agricultural revolution did not make humans civilized, a word that carries unfortunate implications of progress from savagery. Hunter-gatherers were not savages, and early agriculturalists did not suddenly become enlightened. But agriculture did create the material and social conditions that would lead to what we call civilization. Large-scale societies with cities, states, written records, and complex cultural and technological achievements. The shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture was the necessary precursor to everything that followed, the foundation upon which the rest of human history would be built. By 5,000 years ago, agricultural societies existed across much of the inhabited world. In some regions, these societies were coalescing into the first cities and states, experimenting with new forms of social organization, developing writing systems to keep records and transmit knowledge, and building monuments that proclaimed their power and permanence. The scattered populations of hunter-gatherers and early farmers were giving way to something new. Civilizations, with all their glories and their terrible costs. The human story was entering a new chapter. The rise of cities and civilizations. Sometime around 5,000 years ago, in the hot flatlands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something unprecedented was taking shape. Villages were growing into towns, and towns were growing into cities. Not the modest settlements of a few hundred people that had existed for thousands of years, but concentrations of thousands. Eventually tens of thousands of inhabitants living in close proximity, relying on complex systems of food supply, governance, and social organization. These were the first cities, and they marked the emergence of what historians call civilization. The word civilization comes from the Latin civitas, meaning city. Scholars define civilizations by several characteristics: large urban centers, social stratification with distinct classes, centralized political authority, monumental architecture, specialized labor, and usually, though not always, some form of writing. By these criteria, the earliest civilizations arose in 4 major regions: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, all emerging roughly between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was the first. The Tigris and Euphrates, flowing from the mountains of modern Turkey through what is now Iraq, created a fertile floodplain in an otherwise arid landscape. Early farmers had settled the region thousands of years earlier, developing irrigation to channel river water to their fields. Over time, these irrigation projects became more ambitious and complex, requiring coordination across multiple villages. Success brought prosperity and population growth. Villages grew into towns and then into cities. By around 5,000 years ago, the Sumerian civilization had emerged in southern Mesopotamia. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Eridu, and Lagash rose on the alluvial plain, each centered on a massive temple complex called a ziggurat, a stepped pyramid that dominated the skyline and served as the dwelling place of the city's patron god. These were not just religious structures, but economic and administrative centers. Temple priests controlled vast agricultural estates, workshops, and trade networks. They collected tribute, stored grain, distributed rations, and organized labor for public works. Sumerian cities were also political entities, independent city-states, each ruled by a king or council. Competition and conflict between cities was common, but so was trade and cultural exchange. The Sumerians developed sophisticated technologies: bronze metallurgy, the wheel and wheeled vehicles, the potter's wheel, advanced irrigation systems, and monumental architecture using sun-dried mud bricks. They created cylinder seals for marking ownership and authenticating documents, elaborate jewelry and art, musical instruments, and complex religious and literary traditions. Perhaps most significantly, the Sumerians developed writing. Around 5,000 years ago, scribes began using wedge-shaped reed styluses to make marks in wet clay tablets. These earliest marks were pictographic, simple drawings representing objects: a grain stalk for grain, a bull's head for cattle, a foot for walking or going. Over centuries, this system evolved into cuneiform, a sophisticated writing system that could express abstract concepts, grammatical relationships, and the full range of spoken language. Writing emerged from the practical needs of administration, keeping track of goods stored in temple granaries, recording debts and payments, documenting land ownership and contracts. But it quickly expanded to record laws, mythological tales, historical events, and literary works. Egypt, meanwhile, was developing its own civilization along the Nile River. The Nile, unlike the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates, flooded with remarkable regularity each year, depositing nutrient-rich silt that made the valley incredibly fertile. This predictability allowed Egyptian agriculture to flourish without the extensive irrigation systems needed in Mesopotamia. The long, narrow valley also created natural geographical unity, and by around 5,000 years ago, Upper and Lower Egypt had been unified under a single pharaoh, a god-king who wielded absolute power. Egyptian civilization is famous for its monumental architecture. The pyramids, tombs for the pharaohs, were built during the Old Kingdom period, around 4,500 years ago. The largest, the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, required an estimated 2 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons. Moving and placing these stones without modern machinery was an extraordinary feat of engineering, organization, and labor mobilization, involving thousands of workers over decades. Egyptians developed their own writing system, hieroglyphics, at roughly the same time as Sumerian cuneiform. Egyptian hieroglyphs combined pictographic and phonetic elements, and the system remained in use for over 3,000 years. Hieroglyphs were carved into temple walls and monuments, but for everyday writing, Egyptians used hieratic, a cursive script written on papyrus, a paper-like material made from the papyrus plant that grew along the Nile. This writing preserved an enormous body of literature, religious texts, administrative records, and scientific knowledge. Far to the east, in the Indus River Valley, another civilization was emerging. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization after one of its major cities, developed around 4,600 years ago in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. The Indus River, like the Nile and the Mesopotamian rivers, provided water for agriculture through seasonal flooding. Harappan cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were marvels of urban planning. Streets were laid out in grid patterns, with main thoroughfares intersecting at right angles. Houses were built of standardized baked bricks. Most remarkably, the cities had sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems. Individual homes had bathrooms with drains connecting to covered sewers that ran along the streets, a level of urban infrastructure that would not be matched in Europe until Roman times and would not be exceeded until the modern era. The Harappans also developed a writing system, the Indus script, found on thousands of seals and other artifacts. Unfortunately, this script has not yet been deciphered. Without written records that we can read, much about Harappan society remains mysterious. Unlike Mesopotamia and Egypt, Harappan civilization seems to have lacked monumental palaces or temples. There is little evidence of powerful kings or priests. Wealth seems relatively evenly distributed. This has led some scholars to suggest a more egalitarian or perhaps merchant-dominated society, though this remains speculative. Around 3,800 years ago, the Harappan civilization declined. Cities were gradually abandoned, and the sophisticated urban culture disappeared. The causes remain debated. Climate change, specifically the weakening of the monsoon rains that fed the Indus River system, may have been a factor. Tectonic activity might have altered river courses, or there may have been internal social or political factors. Whatever the cause, the Indus Valley civilization, despite its impressive achievements, left fewer lasting impacts on later history than Mesopotamia or Egypt, partly because its writing remains unreadable and partly because of its relatively sudden disappearance. In China, civilization emerged independently along the Yellow River and Yangtze River valleys. The earliest Chinese dynasties are shrouded in legend, but archaeological evidence confirms the existence of the Shang dynasty, ruling from around 3,600 to 3,000 years ago. Shang kings controlled territory in the Yellow River Valley, commanding armies, overseeing agricultural production, and conducting elaborate religious rituals. The Shang are particularly known for their bronze work, producing magnificent bronze vessels for ritual purposes, decorated with intricate patterns and mythical creatures. These bronzes required sophisticated metallurgy, combining copper and tin in precise proportions, and advanced casting techniques. The Shang also developed writing, the direct ancestor of modern Chinese characters. These early writings, found on oracle bones, turtle shells, and animal bones used for divination, show a fully developed script with hundreds of characters, suggesting earlier development not yet discovered. These four early civilizations, geographically separated by thousands of kilometers, developed independently, but showed remarkable parallels. All arose in river valleys where agriculture could support large populations. All developed social hierarchies with ruling classes, often claiming divine authority. All built monumental architecture. All developed writing systems. All created complex religious and cultural traditions. But they were not isolated in some pristine independence. Even at this early date, there was contact and exchange. Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations were aware of each other and traded, particularly in luxury goods like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, which found its way to both regions. The Indus Valley civilization traded extensively with Mesopotamia. Harappan seals have been found in Mesopotamian cities. These exchanges were not yet creating anything like a global economy, but they were connecting distant regions in ways previously impossible. These civilizations also faced common challenges. Managing large populations required administrative systems to collect taxes or tribute, organize labor, maintain infrastructure, and adjudicate disputes. Internal social tensions between rulers and ruled, between classes, between urban and rural populations, required management through a combination of ideology, incentives, and coercion. External threats from nomadic raiders or competing civilizations required military organization and defensive structures. Environmental challenges, floods, droughts, soil degradation, resource depletion threatened the agricultural base on which everything depended. Not all early civilizations survived. The Harappan civilization collapsed and was not immediately replaced. Mesopotamian city-states were repeatedly conquered and absorbed into larger empires: Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian. Each conquest brought destruction, but also cultural continuity and synthesis, as conquerors adopted elements of the cultures they conquered. Egypt endured for an extraordinary span, over 3,000 years, but eventually fell to foreign invaders, first the Persians, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans. China showed perhaps the greatest cultural continuity. Despite dynastic changes, periods of fragmentation, and foreign conquests, Chinese civilization maintained a remarkable coherence, a sense of cultural identity and historical continuity that persists to the present day. This persistence was aided by geographic factors, relative isolation protected by mountains, deserts, and ocean that limited outside interference, and by the unifying effect of the Chinese writing system, which could be read across regional dialects. The rise of civilizations brought many innovations and achievements: art, literature, philosophy, science, engineering, law, governance. But civilization also brought new forms of suffering. Slavery became widespread, with war captives, debtors, and the conquered forced into servitude. Social stratification meant that the majority lived in poverty, while elites enjoyed luxury. Warfare intensified, becoming more organized and deadly. Epidemic diseases thrived in crowded urban conditions, periodically decimating populations. By around 3,000 years ago, civilizations were well established across Afro-Eurasia, from the Mediterranean to East Asia. They were still separated by vast distances and often unaware of each other's existence. But the groundwork had been laid for the next phase of connection. Trade routes were beginning to stretch across regions. Empires were expanding, bringing different peoples into contact. And critically, writing had been invented, allowing knowledge to be recorded, preserved, and transmitted across space and time. The scattered civilizations were slowly, very slowly, beginning to reach toward each other across the distances that divided them. The next great step in building global civilization would be the creation of networks, physical and cultural, that linked these distant centers of population and power. The birth of writing, making memory permanent. There is a particular kind of magic in these marks you are reading now. These collections of lines and curves that represent sounds, that combine into words, that convey meaning across distance and time. You, reading this, are performing an act that would have been impossible for the vast majority of humans who have ever lived. You are decoding symbols that preserve thoughts, knowledge, and stories, creating in your mind something that originated in someone else's mind perhaps years ago, perhaps thousands of miles away. Writing is perhaps the single most consequential innovation in human history. Before writing, knowledge existed only in memory, passed down orally from generation to generation. What could be remembered, what was considered important enough to memorize and repeat, that survived. Everything else vanished. The death of a skilled craftsperson, a wise elder, a storyteller, meant the potential loss of irreplaceable knowledge. Societies could accumulate wisdom only as fast as they could teach it, and they could transmit it only through direct personal contact. Writing changed everything. For the first time, knowledge could be fixed, made permanent, stored outside the fragile human brain. A farmer's observations about planting times, a merchant's records of transactions, a priest's ritual incantations, a king's laws, a poet's verses, all could be written down and consulted later by anyone who could read. Writing allowed the accumulation of knowledge across generations, the transmission of ideas across vast distances, and the development of complex systems of administration, law, commerce, and culture that would have been impossible to manage through memory alone. Writing was invented independently at least 3 times: in Mesopotamia around 5,400 years ago, in Egypt shortly thereafter, and in China around 3,400 years ago. Later, writing systems emerged in Mesoamerica. Each invention followed a similar pattern, beginning with simple pictographs and evolving toward more abstract and systematic representation of language. The earliest writing in Mesopotamia emerged from a token system used for accounting. As early as 8,000 years ago, Mesopotamian peoples used small clay objects of different shapes to represent commodities. A cone might represent a small measure of grain, a sphere a larger measure, a cylinder an animal. These tokens could be used to keep track of goods stored in temple granaries or exchanged in trade. Eventually, instead of handling actual tokens, scribes began making impressions of tokens in soft clay, creating a permanent record. Then they began simply drawing symbols that represented the tokens. These drawings evolved into pictographs, simplified pictures representing objects or concepts. By around 5,200 years ago, this pictographic system had evolved into cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge, referring to the wedge-shaped marks made by pressing a reed stylus into clay at different angles. Cuneiform was a revolutionary step because it became phonetic. Instead of just representing objects, symbols began to represent sounds, syllables that could be combined to form any word in the Sumerian language. This allowed scribes to record not just inventories, but also abstract concepts, grammatical elements, names, historical events, laws, myths, poetry. Everything that could be spoken could now be written. Cuneiform spread beyond the Sumerians, adapted by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Hittites, Persians, and others to write many different languages. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature, was written in Akkadian cuneiform. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most complete legal codes, was inscribed in cuneiform on a stone stele. Thousands of cuneiform tablets have been recovered, preserved because clay tablets, if baked or even just dried, can last millennia. These tablets provide an astonishing window into ancient life. Business contracts, school exercises, medical prescriptions, mathematical calculations, astronomical observations, prayers, love poems, shopping lists, the mundane and the profound, all preserved in wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay thousands of years ago. Egyptian hieroglyphs developed at roughly the same time as Sumerian cuneiform, perhaps influenced by the idea of writing, if not by the specific system. Egyptian hieroglyphs were beautiful and complex, combining pictographic symbols that represented objects, ideographic symbols that represented concepts, and phonetic symbols that represented sounds. The same symbol could function in different ways depending on context. This complexity made hieroglyphs difficult to learn, and writing remained the province of a small class of trained scribes. For everyday purposes, Egyptians used hieratic, a simplified cursive version of hieroglyphs written with a reed pen and ink on papyrus. Hieratic was faster to write and more practical for administrative and business records. Later, an even more simplified script called demotic emerged. But hieroglyphs continued to be used for monumental inscriptions carved into temple walls, tombs, and statues. proclaiming the deeds of pharaohs and the words of gods. Hieroglyphs remained a mystery for centuries after ancient Egyptian civilization ended. By the 4th century of the Common Era, knowledge of how to read hieroglyphs had been lost. The script became an enigma, elaborate pictures whose meanings were unknown. Then, in 1799, French soldiers in Egypt discovered the Rosetta Stone, a large stone stele inscribed with the same text in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. Since scholars could read Ancient Greek, they had a key to understanding the other scripts. After decades of work, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion succeeded in deciphering hieroglyphs in 1822, unlocking 3,000 years of Egyptian history. Chinese writing developed independently from Mesopotamian or Egyptian scripts. The earliest Chinese characters, found on oracle bones dating to the Shang dynasty around 3,400 years ago, were already sophisticated, suggesting earlier development not yet discovered. These oracle bone inscriptions were used for divination. Questions would be inscribed on turtle shells or ox bones. The bones would be heated until they cracked, and the patterns of cracks would be interpreted as answers from ancestors or gods. Chinese characters are logographic. Each character represents a word or meaningful unit rather than a sound. This makes Chinese writing complex. There are thousands of characters to learn, but it also makes it remarkably flexible. The same characters can be read in different Chinese languages or dialects, even though pronunciation varies. This allowed the Chinese script to serve as a unifying force across a vast and linguistically diverse region. Even today, speakers of Mandarin and Cantonese, who cannot understand each other's spoken languages, can read the same written text. The invention of writing created profound social and cultural changes. It created a new class of specialists, scribes, who had valuable skills in a largely illiterate world. In many societies, scribes held positions of power and prestige, serving as administrators, priests, and advisors to rulers. Writing enabled more complex forms of government, making it possible to administer large territories and populations through written orders, laws, and records. Writing also changed the nature of knowledge itself. Oral knowledge is fluid, changing slightly each time it is told, adapting to new circumstances and audiences. Written knowledge is fixed, creating a sense of permanence and authority. A written law is clearer and less ambiguous than an orally transmitted one. A written contract can be consulted to settle disputes. A written historical record claims objectivity and permanence, though of course, written history can also be propaganda. Literature, as we understand it, became possible with writing. Oral traditions produced magnificent epics, poems, and stories, and some of these were eventually written down. But written literature could be longer, more complex, carefully crafted and revised. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Egyptian tale of Sinuhe, the Indian Vedas, and Mahabharata, the Chinese classic of poetry. These works, whether composed orally or in writing, were preserved and transmitted through written texts, becoming foundational to their respective cultures. Religious texts gained special authority through writing. The Hebrew Bible, the Christian New Testament, the Islamic Quran, the Buddhist Sutras, the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. These sacred texts were seen as containing the divine word, made permanent and unchangeable through writing. The existence of authoritative written texts also created the possibility of heresy, of disagreeing with official interpretations, and of religious reform based on returning to original written sources. Science and mathematics advanced through writing. Observations could be recorded and compared across years or generations. Mathematical techniques could be documented and refined. Astronomical tables tracking the movements of planets and stars. Medical texts describing treatments. Engineering manuals detailing construction techniques all depended on writing. The great libraries of the ancient world, like the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, gathered written knowledge from across the known world, creating centers of learning and scholarship. Yet for most of human history, literacy remained the province of a small elite. Writing systems were complex, and learning to read and write required years of training. Most people were illiterate, depending on scribes to write letters or contracts, and on public readings to learn the content of laws or proclamations. This created a fundamental divide in society between those who controlled written knowledge and those who did not. Writing also created the possibility of history in the modern sense, not just oral traditions and legends, but documented accounts claiming to record what actually happened. Of course, written histories were often biased, exaggerated, or simply wrong. They reflected the perspectives and agendas of rulers and elites who commissioned them. But they preserved information that would otherwise have been lost, and they created a sense of connection to the past, a documented continuity across generations. The development of writing systems was neither uniform nor inevitable. Many societies never developed writing independently, and some adopted writing only when introduced from outside. The Inca Empire, one of the largest and most sophisticated civilizations in pre-Columbian America, never developed a full writing system, relying instead on quipu, knotted strings that recorded numerical and possibly some categorical information. The absence of writing did not prevent the Inca from building a vast empire and creating impressive achievements in engineering, agriculture, and governance, but it did limit their ability to preserve complex information across time and distance. In our modern world, where literacy is nearly universal in developed countries and written text surrounds us constantly, it is hard to imagine the magnitude of writing's impact. But consider, without writing, there would be no accumulated scientific knowledge, no detailed historical records, no complex legal systems, no literature, no long-distance coordination of trade or government. Human civilization as we know it, the entire edifice of accumulated knowledge and culture, rests on the foundation of those ancient innovations, those first tentative marks pressed into clay or scratched on stone, representing the human desire to remember, to communicate across distance, and to leave a lasting mark on the world. Writing made memory permanent. It allowed knowledge to accumulate, and it created the possibility of transmitting ideas not just to people standing nearby, but to people in distant lands and distant times, including to you, here, now, reading these words separated by however much space and time from when and where they were written. Writing helped build the infrastructure of ideas that would support increasingly complex networks of human connection, networks that would eventually span the globe. Roads of connection, ancient trade networks, silk, a luxurious fabric, smooth and shimmering, light as breath yet strong enough to last for centuries. For thousands of years, the method of making silk was a closely guarded secret of China. The process involved cultivating mulberry trees, raising silkworms, harvesting their cocoons, unwinding the fine filaments, and weaving them into fabric. Chinese silk became one of the most valued commodities in the ancient world, desired by elites from Rome to Persia to India for its beauty, rarity, and the status it conferred on those who wore it. But silk was not the only treasure moving along the ancient trade routes. Spices from India and Southeast Asia, precious stones from Afghanistan, horses from Central Asia, gold and ivory from Africa, glassware from Rome, pottery from Greece, incense from Arabia. All these and countless other goods traveled along networks of roads, paths, and sea lanes that connected the major civilizations of Afro-Eurasia. These networks, collectively known as the Silk Road, though they were never a single road and carried far more than silk, were perhaps the most important conduits for exchange in the ancient and medieval world. The Silk Road was not built by any single authority or for any unified purpose. Rather, it emerged gradually over centuries as merchants, nomads, pilgrims, and envoys created and maintained routes across difficult terrain, linking oasis towns in Central Asian deserts, crossing mountain passes in the Himalayas and the Pamir Mountains, following river valleys, and island hopping along coasts. These routes existed as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, but they became more formalized and active during the Han Dynasty in China around 2,000 years ago. The Chinese emperors sent envoys westward to establish diplomatic relations and secure military alliances against nomadic tribes, particularly the Xiongnu, who threatened China's northwestern frontiers. These diplomatic missions opened routes through Central Asia, making contact with kingdoms in the Tarim Basin, Sogdiana, Bactria, and Parthia. Chinese silk began flowing west in large quantities, and horses from Central Asian steppes, highly valued by Chinese armies, flowed east in return. The silk for horses trade became one of the most sustained exchanges along the Silk Road, lasting for centuries. The routes were long and arduous. Few merchants traveled the entire distance from China to Rome. Instead, goods passed through many hands, with each middleman taking a profit. Central Asian cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar grew wealthy as hubs on the trade routes. These oasis cities, surrounded by deserts, depended on trade for their prosperity. They developed sophisticated caravanserais, large inns where caravans could rest, resupply, and exchange goods. These caravanserais became centers of cultural exchange where traders from different regions met, shared information, learned each other's languages, and blended cultures. The Sogdians, a people from Central Asia, became the premier merchants and facilitators of Silk Road trade. They spoke a language well suited to commerce, established trading colonies across Asia, and were noted for their literacy and record-keeping. Sogdian merchant letters, preserved by chance in the dry climate of Western China, give us glimpses of their business dealings, family relationships, and the challenges of long-distance trade. Goods lost in transit, debtors who could not pay, political instability disrupting routes, the loneliness of merchants far from home for years or even decades. The Silk Road was not only an overland route. Maritime Silk Road routes connected China to Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. These sea routes were in some ways more efficient than overland routes, as ships could carry far greater quantities of goods, and ocean travel, while dangerous, was often faster than the slow pace of camel caravans crossing deserts and mountains. Ports like Guangzhou in China, Malacca in Southeast Asia, Calicut in India, and Muscat in Arabia thrived as commercial centers. What made the Silk Road so important was not just the flow of goods, but the flow of ideas, technologies, religions, and cultures. Buddhism, which originated in India around 2,500 years ago, spread along the Silk Road to Central Asia, China, Korea, and eventually Japan. Buddhist monks traveled the routes as pilgrims and missionaries, establishing monasteries and translating texts. The transmission of Buddhism brought not just religious beliefs, but also art, architecture, and philosophy. Central Asian and East Asian Buddhist art shows clear influences from Indian and even Greco-Roman styles, creating beautiful syntheses of different artistic traditions. Christianity also spread along the Silk Road, particularly Nestorian Christianity, a branch that was declared heretical by the Roman and Byzantine churches, but found acceptance in Persia and Central Asia. Nestorian missionaries reached China by the 7th century, establishing churches and translating Christian texts into Chinese. Islam, emerging in Arabia in the 7th century, spread rapidly along trade routes, eventually becoming dominant in Central Asia and making significant inroads into China, India, and Southeast Asia. These religious expansions were peaceful, spread by merchants and missionaries rather than armies, though political conquests also played a role. Technologies traveled along the Silk Road. Paper, invented in China, spread westward, reaching the Islamic world by the 8th century and Europe several centuries later. The transmission of paper-making technology revolutionized the Islamic world, enabling the production of books on a scale impossible with previous writing materials like papyrus or parchment. Gunpowder, also invented in China, traveled westward and was adopted by Islamic and European armies, transforming warfare. Printing technology, including woodblock printing and later movable type, spread from China to Korea and eventually influenced the development of printing in Europe. Agricultural products also traveled along the routes. Rice, originally domesticated in China, spread throughout Asia. Wheat, barley, and other crops from the Middle East reached China. Citrus fruits, peaches, apricots, and many spices moved between regions, enriching diets and creating new agricultural practices. The spread of crops led to what historians call the medieval green revolution in the Islamic world, where new crops and improved agricultural techniques increased food production and supported population growth. Disease also traveled along the Silk Road. The plague of Justinian, which devastated the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, may have originated in China and spread westward along trade routes. The Black Death, which killed perhaps a third of Europe's population in the 14th century, likely traveled along the Silk Road from Central Asia, carried by fleas on rats that stowed away on merchant ships and caravans. These disease outbreaks were catastrophic, but they also demonstrated the extent of interconnection, how events in one part of Eurasia could have profound impacts thousands of kilometers away. The Silk Road was not always peaceful. Political instability, wars, and the rise and fall of empires frequently disrupted trade. The routes depended on relative stability and security for merchants to travel safely. When powerful empires like the Han in China, the Parthian and later Persian empires in the Middle East, or the Roman and Byzantine empires in the Mediterranean maintained order, trade flourished. When these empires weakened or collapsed, trade declined. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century, despite their violence, actually facilitated Silk Road trade. The Mongol Empire, at its height, stretched from Korea to Eastern Europe, encompassing most of Central Asia and the Middle East. Under Mongol rule, merchants could travel with relative safety across vast distances. The Mongols actively promoted trade, establishing postal systems, protecting merchants, and standardizing weights and measures. This period saw increased contact between East and West. European travelers like Marco Polo journeyed to China and brought back accounts of the wealth and sophistication of Chinese civilization. But the Mongol Empire eventually fragmented, and by the 15th century, the overland Silk Road routes were declining. Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean and Middle East made overland trade from Europe to Asia more difficult and expensive. Europeans began seeking alternative routes to the riches of Asia, leading to the Age of Exploration and the opening of sea routes around Africa and across the Atlantic. Yet during its long heyday, the Silk Road was the most important network connecting the major civilizations of Afro-Eurasia. It was not a highway with a single route, but a web of interconnected paths, adapting to political changes, environmental conditions, and economic opportunities. It brought diverse peoples into contact, facilitated the exchange of goods, technologies, ideas, and religions, and helped create a sense of an interconnected world, even if most people never traveled far from their homes and had only vague knowledge of distant lands. The Silk Road reminds us that globalization is not a modern phenomenon. Humans have been building connections across long distances for millennia, driven by curiosity, the search for profit, religious zeal, political ambition, and the simple human desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. These ancient networks laid the groundwork for the more intensive globalization that would follow, proving that such connections were possible and beneficial, even if they were also fraught with danger, difficulty, and unintended consequences. The Age of Sail, bridging distant shores. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, an Italian navigator sailing under the Spanish flag, set out westward across the Atlantic Ocean. He was seeking a new route to Asia, hoping to reach the rich markets of China and India by sailing west instead of east. He did not find Asia. Instead, he encountered islands in the Caribbean, initiating European contact with the Americas and setting in motion events that would reshape the world. Columbus was not the first European to reach the Americas. Norse explorers had established temporary settlements in Newfoundland 500 years earlier, but his voyages had lasting consequences. Within decades, European powers were mounting expeditions to explore, conquer, and colonize vast territories in the Americas, fundamentally altering the demographic, ecological, and cultural landscape of both the Americas and Europe. The Age of Exploration, spanning roughly from the 15th to the 17th centuries, was driven by several factors. European states sought direct access to the spices, silks, and other luxury goods of Asia, bypassing the Muslim and Venetian middlemen who controlled overland trade routes and Mediterranean ports. Advances in navigation technology made long ocean voyages more feasible. The compass, borrowed from Chinese innovations, allowed ships to navigate even when stars were obscured. The astrolabe and later the sextant enabled sailors to determine latitude by measuring the angle of the sun or stars. Improved ship designs, particularly the caravel and later the galleon, combined square and lateen sails, making vessels more maneuverable and capable of sailing against the wind. Portugal led the early exploration efforts, sponsored by Prince Henry the Navigator. Portuguese ships sailed down the west coast of Africa throughout the 15th century, establishing trading posts and seeking a sea route to India. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, proving that a sea route to Asia was possible. 10 years later, Vasco da Gama completed the voyage, reaching India and returning to Portugal with a cargo of spices that sold for 60 times the cost of the expedition. This success established Portugal as a major maritime power and inaugurated a century of Portuguese dominance in the Indian Ocean. Spain, Portugal's rival, sponsored Columbus's westward voyage, hoping to find an alternative route to Asia. Columbus's error in believing the Earth was smaller than it actually is led him to think he had reached the East Indies when he encountered Caribbean islands. The realization that this was a new world, previously unknown to Europeans, quickly became apparent. Subsequent Spanish expeditions explored and claimed vast territories in Central and South America. Spanish conquistadors, most infamously Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, acquiring enormous wealth in gold and silver and subjugating indigenous populations through a combination of military force, political maneuvering, and the unintentional spread of diseases to which native peoples had no immunity. One of the most ambitious voyages of the Age of Exploration was Ferdinand Magellan's expedition, which set out from Spain in 1519. Magellan aimed to reach the Spice Islands by sailing west, circumnavigating the globe. The journey was harrowing. The fleet faced storms, near starvation, and mutiny. Magellan himself was killed in the Philippines in 1521, but one ship, commanded by Juan Sebastián Elcano, completed the circumnavigation, returning to Spain in 1522 with a cargo of spices. This voyage proved definitively that the Earth was round and could be circled by sea, and it demonstrated the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, which was far larger than Europeans had imagined. The Age of Exploration had profound and often devastating consequences for indigenous peoples. European diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, to which native populations had no immunity, spread rapidly through the Americas, causing massive depopulation. Estimates suggest that up to 90% of indigenous populations in some regions died within a century of European contact, one of the greatest demographic catastrophes in human history. European colonization brought forced labor, slavery, cultural suppression, and the destruction of indigenous societies. The Atlantic slave trade, which forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas to work on plantations, was another horrific consequence of this era. Yet the Age of Exploration also initiated what has been called the Columbian Exchange, the widespread transfer of plants, animals, cultures, human populations, technologies, and diseases between the Americas and the Old World. Crops domesticated in the Americas, maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, tobacco, quickly spread to Europe, Africa, and Asia, transforming agriculture and diets. Potatoes, in particular, became a staple crop in Europe, supporting population growth. Conversely, Old World crops like wheat, rice, and coffee, and animals like horses, cattle, pigs, and chickens were introduced to the Americas, fundamentally altering ecosystems and ways of life. The influx of silver from American mines, particularly Potosi in present-day Bolivia, had global economic effects. Silver flowed from the Americas to Europe, and from Europe to Asia, particularly China, which had a high demand for silver. This massive transfer of wealth stimulated global trade and contributed to the rise of a more integrated world economy. The economic center of Europe shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, benefiting states like Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands. The Age of Exploration was also an age of empire building. European powers established colonies across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, creating empires that would last for centuries. These empires brought together diverse peoples under European domination, facilitating the spread of European languages, religions, particularly Christianity, and cultural practices, while often suppressing indigenous cultures. The legacies of colonialism, both the infrastructure and institutions it created, and the exploitation and injustices it perpetrated continue to shape the modern world. By the 17th century, regular transatlantic and trans-Pacific voyages had been established. Spanish galleons sailed annually between Acapulco in Mexico and Manila in the Philippines, carrying silver west and Asian goods east. European merchant companies, like the Dutch and British East India Companies, established trading posts and eventually colonial rule in Asia. The world's oceans, once formidable barriers, had become highways connecting continents. For the first time in history, all the inhabited continents except Antarctica were linked in sustained contact. This new level of global interconnection had mixed consequences. It enabled greater cultural exchange, the spread of knowledge and ideas, and economic integration. But it also facilitated exploitation, conquest, and cultural destruction on an unprecedented scale. The age of exploration was not a triumph of progress, but a complex and often tragic period that reshaped the world in ways both beneficial and deeply harmful. It marked a crucial step toward true globalization, the point at which human societies scattered across the globe began to form a single, interconnected system, for better and for worse. The Industrial Awakening, machines and movement. In the late 18th century, in the countryside and burgeoning cities of Britain, something extraordinary began to happen. Machines powered by coal and steam started to replace human and animal labor. Factories arose, producing goods on a scale and at a pace previously unimaginable. Railways and steamships shrank distances, allowing people and products to move faster and farther than ever before. Within a century, these changes, collectively known as the Industrial Revolution, had transformed Britain into the world's leading economic and military power and had begun spreading to Europe, North America, and eventually across the globe. The Industrial Revolution did not happen overnight. It emerged from a confluence of factors: technological innovations, abundant coal deposits, agricultural improvements that freed labor from farms, a culture that valued entrepreneurship and innovation, colonial wealth that provided capital for investment, and legal and political systems that protected property rights and encouraged commerce. Britain, having these factors in combination, became the birthplace of industrialization. The textile industry was one of the first to be transformed. Inventions like the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom mechanized the production of thread and cloth, vastly increasing output and reducing costs. Factories, powered first by water wheels and then by steam engines, brought workers together under one roof, replacing the older system of cottage industry where people worked at home. This factory system increased efficiency, but also created harsh working conditions: long hours, dangerous machinery, low wages, child labor, and crowded, unsanitary housing for workers. The steam engine, improved by James Watt in the late 18th century, was the crucial innovation that powered the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines could run continuously, unaffected by seasons or weather, unlike water wheels or windmills. They could be located anywhere with access to coal and water, not just near rivers. Steam power was applied to factories, mines, and transportation. Steam-powered pumps drained water from deep coal mines, allowing extraction of far more coal, which in turn powered more steam engines, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. The application of steam power to transportation revolutionized the movement of people and goods. The first successful steam-powered railway, built in 1825, connected the towns of Stockton and Darlington in England. Within decades, railways crisscrossed Britain and were spreading to the United States, Europe, and beyond. Railways dramatically reduced the cost and time of transporting goods and people. Travel that once took days or weeks now took hours. Fresh goods could reach distant markets before spoiling. Railways opened up interior regions to development and connected rural areas to cities and ports. Steamships similarly transformed maritime transport. Early steamships were less efficient than sailing ships for long ocean voyages, but by the mid-19th century, improvements in engine design and the use of iron and steel hulls made steamships faster, more reliable, and capable of carrying larger cargoes. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 and the Panama Canal in 1914 further shortened maritime routes, connecting oceans and reducing travel times between continents. Communication also underwent revolutionary change. The telegraph, invented in the 1830s and 1840s, allowed messages to be transmitted almost instantaneously across long distances using electrical signals through wires. Telegraph lines followed railway lines, and soon submarine cables were laid across oceans. By 1866, a telegraph cable stretched across the Atlantic, allowing near-instant communication between Europe and North America. This fundamentally changed business, diplomacy, and the spread of news. Events occurring on one continent could be known on another within hours instead of weeks or months. The Industrial Revolution was not just about technology. It involved profound social and economic changes. Urbanization accelerated as people moved from rural areas to cities seeking factory work. Cities grew explosively, often without adequate infrastructure, leading to overcrowding, pollution, and public health crises. The working class, employed in factories and mines, often endured brutal conditions, but they also began to organize, forming trade unions to demand better wages and working conditions, and becoming a significant political force. Capitalism, as an economic system, became dominant during the Industrial Revolution. Factory owners and investors accumulated enormous wealth, while workers often struggled to survive. This inequality sparked ideological responses, including socialism and communism, which critiqued capitalism and proposed alternative economic systems based on collective or state ownership of the means of production. The works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, particularly the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, became foundational texts for socialist and communist movements. Industrialization also had environmental consequences. The burning of coal for steam power produced massive amounts of air pollution, darkening skies and damaging health. Water pollution from factories contaminated rivers and streams. Deforestation for fuel and to clear land for agriculture accelerated. These environmental impacts were local at first, but would eventually contribute to global environmental challenges like climate change. The Industrial Revolution spread unevenly across the world. After Britain, industrialization took hold in Belgium, France, Germany, and the United States during the 19th century. Japan underwent rapid industrialization starting in the late 19th century, following the Meiji Restoration. Other regions industrialized later or remained primarily agricultural into the 20th century. This uneven development created and reinforced global inequalities, with industrialized nations gaining economic and military power, while less industrialized regions often became sources of raw materials and markets for manufactured goods. Relationships frequently enforced through colonialism and imperialism. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a second industrial revolution was underway, characterized by new technologies. electricity, the internal combustion engine, chemicals, and steel. Electricity, more flexible and cleaner than steam power, could be transmitted over distances and used for lighting, heating, and powering machines. The electric telegraph gave way to the telephone, invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, allowing voice communication. The internal combustion engine, running on gasoline or diesel fuel, powered automobiles and airplanes, further revolutionizing transportation. The invention of the airplane by the Wright brothers in 1903 inaugurated the age of aviation. Though initially limited in range and capacity, airplanes improved rapidly, especially during the two world wars. By the mid-20th century, commercial air travel was connecting continents, making it possible to travel from New York to London in hours instead of days by ship. Air transport further accelerated globalization by enabling the rapid movement of people, goods, and information. Mass media also emerged during this period. The invention of the phonograph, radio, cinema, and later television allowed information and entertainment to reach mass audiences. Radio and film broke down local and national boundaries, spreading culture and ideas globally. Hollywood films were watched around the world. Radio broadcasts reached across borders. These media created shared cultural experiences and contributed to the homogenization of global culture, though they also sparked reactions seeking to preserve local traditions. The Industrial Revolution and its successors fundamentally transformed human society, creating modern economies, reshaping social structures, and enabling levels of productivity and wealth previously unimaginable. But they also created deep inequalities, environmental degradation, and new forms of conflict. The same technologies that connected the world and raised living standards for many also enabled more devastating wars, more efficient exploitation of resources, and global-scale environmental problems. As humanity entered the 20th century, it had become capable of reshaping the planet in profound ways, but it had not yet developed the wisdom or institutions to manage the power it had unleashed. The digital web, a planet connected. In the span of a single human lifetime, the world has changed more dramatically than in any previous period of history. The change is not in physical geography. The continents have not moved, but in how we connect to each other, how we access information, how we communicate, work, learn, and entertain ourselves. This transformation has a name: the Information Revolution, or sometimes the Digital Revolution, driven by computers and the internet, technologies that have woven a global web of instantaneous communication and access to knowledge. The roots of this revolution stretch back to the mid-20th century with the development of electronic computers. Early computers, built in the 1940s, were enormous machines filling entire rooms, using vacuum tubes and consuming vast amounts of electricity to perform calculations that a modern smartphone could do in a fraction of a second. These early computers were used primarily for military and scientific purposes, calculating artillery trajectories, breaking codes during World War II, simulating nuclear reactions, and processing census data. But computers rapidly improved. The invention of the transistor in 1947, replacing vacuum tubes, made computers smaller, faster, and more reliable. Integrated circuits, developed in the 1950s and 60s, allowed thousands and eventually millions of transistors to be packed onto tiny silicon chips, further miniaturizing and accelerating computers. By the 1970s, personal computers were becoming feasible for consumers, not just large institutions. Companies like Apple, founded in 1976, and IBM, which released its personal computer in 1981, brought computing power into homes and small businesses. Personal computers were transformative, enabling word processing, spreadsheets, databases, and eventually multimedia applications. But the truly revolutionary step came with the development of computer networks, allowing computers to communicate with each other, share information, and access remote resources. The Internet, the global network of interconnected computer networks, has its origins in the ARPANET, a project of the United States Department of Defense begun in 1969 to create a resilient communication system that could survive partial destruction. ARPANET connected universities and research institutions, allowing researchers to share data and collaborate remotely. The protocols developed for ARPANET, particularly TCP/IP, became the foundation for the Internet. Through the 1970s and 80s, the Internet slowly expanded, connecting more institutions and eventually opening to commercial use. But it remained primarily a tool for academics, researchers, and technology enthusiasts. The breakthrough that brought the Internet to the masses was the World Wide Web, invented by Tim Berners-Lee in 1989. The web provided a simple, intuitive way to publish and access information on the Internet using hypertext, documents linked together through clickable connections. Web browsers, software applications for viewing web pages, made the Internet accessible to anyone with a computer and a modem. By the mid-1990s, the web was growing explosively. Companies, organizations, and individuals rushed to establish websites. E-commerce emerged, allowing goods to be bought and sold online. Search engines like Google, founded in 1998, made it possible to find information among the billions of pages on the web. The Internet, combined with the spread of personal computers, fundamentally changed communication. Email, invented in the 1970s but becoming mainstream in the 1990s, provided near-instant written communication across any distance at almost no cost. Instant messaging, online forums, and later social media platforms like Facebook, founded in 2004, and Twitter, founded in 2006, created new forms of social interaction, allowing people to maintain relationships, form communities, and share information with unprecedented ease. Mobile technology accelerated these changes. Mobile phones, which became widely available in the 1990s, evolved from simple devices for voice calls into smartphones, pocket-sized computers with internet connectivity, cameras, GPS, and countless applications. The introduction of the iPhone in 2007 and the proliferation of Android smartphones shortly thereafter put powerful computing and communication tools in the hands of billions of people. By 2025, there were more mobile phone subscriptions than people on Earth, and internet penetration had reached over 60% of the global population. This digital connectivity has created a truly global information space. Information that once took weeks to travel by ship or days by airmail now moves at the speed of light through fiber optic cables and satellite links. A person in a remote village can, given internet access, read news from across the world, watch videos, learn new skills, communicate with people on other continents, and access more information than the largest libraries of the past. This democratization of information has enormous potential for education, economic development, and social progress. E-commerce and digital payment systems have globalized trade at the individual level. A small business in one country can sell products to customers anywhere in the world. Digital platforms like Amazon, Alibaba, and eBay facilitate transactions across borders. Cryptocurrencies and digital payment systems enable financial transactions without traditional banks, particularly important in regions with limited banking infrastructure. The digital revolution has also transformed work. Many jobs, particularly in information-based industries like software development, finance, design, and writing, can be performed remotely. Video conferencing and collaboration tools allow teams to work together even when scattered across continents. This has enabled globalization of labor markets, with companies outsourcing work to wherever skills and costs are most favorable. The COVID-19 pandemic, beginning in 2019, dramatically accelerated this shift, forcing much of the global workforce to work from home and demonstrating the viability of remote work on a massive scale. Social media has become a dominant form of communication and cultural expression, particularly for younger generations. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter shape how people interact, how they consume news and entertainment, and even how they perceive themselves and others. Social media has connected people across vast distances, enabled activism and social movements, and provided platforms for marginalized voices. But it has also created problems. The spread of misinformation, filter bubbles that reinforce existing beliefs, cyberbullying, mental health impacts from constant comparison to others' curated lives, and the erosion of privacy. The internet has also raised concerns about security and governance. Cyber attacks, including hacking, data breaches, ransomware, and nation-state cyber warfare, have become major threats. The internet was not designed with strong security, and protecting digital systems and data is an ongoing challenge. Questions about internet governance, who controls it, who can access it, how to balance free speech with preventing harm, remain contentious and unresolved. Artificial intelligence, a field of computer science focused on creating machines that can perform tasks requiring intelligence, has seen dramatic advances in recent years. AI systems can now recognize speech and images, translate languages, play complex games like chess and Go at superhuman levels, and generate text, images, and music. Machine learning, a subset of AI where systems improve through experience rather than explicit programming, has enabled applications from personalized recommendations to autonomous vehicles. The potential of AI to transform society, for good and ill, is immense and still largely unknown. The digital revolution has not benefited everyone equally. A digital divide exists between those with reliable access to the internet and digital devices and those without. This divide often follows existing lines of inequality between wealthy and poor nations, between urban and rural areas, between rich and poor within countries. Those without digital access are increasingly excluded from economic opportunities, education, and social participation. Efforts to expand internet access, including satellite-based systems and community networks, are ongoing but incomplete. The environmental impact of digital technology is also significant. Data centers, which store and process the vast quantities of data flowing through the internet, consume enormous amounts of electricity, much of it still generated from fossil fuels. The manufacturing of computers, smartphones, and other devices requires rare minerals, often mined in environmentally destructive ways. Electronic waste, discarded devices, is a growing environmental problem, as many components are toxic and difficult to recycle. Despite these challenges, the information revolution has created an unprecedented level of global interconnection. People are more aware of events in distant places, more able to communicate across borders, more exposed to different cultures and perspectives than at any previous time in history. Whether this leads to greater understanding and cooperation, or to conflict and fragmentation, remains an open question. The tools of connection are neutral. How they are used depends on human choices, values, and wisdom. The digital web has, in a very real sense, created Marshall McLuhan's global village, a world where distance matters less and where events anywhere can have immediate impacts everywhere. This creates both opportunities and responsibilities. We live in a world where our actions, mediated through technology, can touch lives far from our own, where our economies are interlinked, where our environmental impacts are global, and where our fates, whether we acknowledge it or not, are increasingly intertwined. The global village, where we stand today. If you were to step back, far back, and view the Earth from the perspective of space, you would see a small blue sphere hanging in the black void, a planet covered mostly by oceans, swirled with white clouds, marked by green and brown land masses. From that distance, there are no national borders, no divisions between peoples, just one world, one home for all of humanity. This perspective, afforded by space exploration and satellite imagery, has become a powerful symbol of global unity. The famous photograph, Earthrise, taken by Apollo 8 astronauts in 1968, showing Earth rising above the moon's barren landscape, profoundly affected how many people thought about our planet. For the first time in history, we could see Earth as a whole, a single interconnected system, finite and fragile. Today, we live in a world more connected than ever before. Nearly 5 billion people, more than 60% of the global population, have internet access. Billions more have mobile phones. Air travel connects every major city, and global supply chains link producers and consumers across continents. English has become a global lingua franca, spoken by hundreds of millions as a second language, facilitating international communication. Global media, from Hollywood films to K-pop music to Bollywood cinema, reach worldwide audiences. International organizations, the United Nations, World Health Organization, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and many others, provide forums for cooperation and coordination on global issues. This global interconnection has brought many benefits. International trade has raised living standards in many countries, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. The free flow of information has enabled scientific collaboration, with researchers from different countries working together on problems from disease eradication to climate change to fundamental physics. Cultural exchange has enriched societies, exposing people to diverse traditions, ideas, and perspectives. Human rights? The concept that all people possess fundamental rights regardless of nationality, ethnicity, religion, or status has gained global recognition, even if the reality often falls short of the ideal. Yet we face global challenges that require cooperation at an unprecedented scale. Climate change, driven by the burning of fossil fuels, is altering weather patterns, raising sea levels, and threatening ecosystems and human communities worldwide. No single nation can solve climate change alone. It requires coordinated global action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to changes already underway. The problem is that the costs and benefits of action are unevenly distributed, both between nations and within them, making agreement difficult. Environmental degradation extends beyond climate change. Deforestation, overfishing, pollution, loss of biodiversity, all these problems cross borders and threaten the planetary systems on which all life depends. The oceans, which belong to no one nation and yet to all of humanity, are being depleted and polluted. The atmosphere, similarly a global commons, is being altered by our emissions. Managing these commons requires global governance structures that are still inadequate. Pandemics, like the COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2019, demonstrate how interconnected the world has become. A virus emerging in one location can spread globally within weeks, disrupting societies and economies everywhere. The pandemic highlighted both the potential for global cooperation, such as the rapid development and distribution of vaccines, and the failures of cooperation, with wealthy nations hoarding vaccines while poorer nations struggled to access them. It also revealed how dependent global supply chains have become, with disruptions in one region causing shortages thousands of miles away. Economic inequality, both between nations and within them, remains stark. The wealthiest nations and individuals possess resources unimaginable a century ago, while billions still live in poverty, lacking access to clean water, adequate food, healthcare, and education. Globalization has created winners and losers, and the distribution of its benefits has been uneven. This inequality fuels resentment, conflict, and migration as people flee poverty and violence in search of better lives. Political fragmentation and nationalism have resurged in recent years, even as economic and technological integration has deepened. Many people feel left behind by globalization, and populist movements have emerged promising to protect national interests and traditional cultures against perceived threats from immigration, multiculturalism, and international institutions. The tension between global interconnection and national sovereignty, between cosmopolitan and local identities, is one of the defining political challenges of our time. Technology, which has connected us, also poses risks. Artificial intelligence and automation may displace workers in many industries, creating unemployment and social disruption. Autonomous weapons, systems that can select and engage targets without human intervention, raise profound ethical and security concerns. Genetic engineering, including technologies like CRISPR that allow precise editing of DNA, offers potential to cure diseases, but also raises questions about the limits of human intervention in biology. Nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and other emerging fields offer great promise, but also potential dangers if misused. Despite these challenges, there is reason for hope. Humans have proven capable of remarkable cooperation and ingenuity. The eradication of smallpox, achieved through a global vaccination campaign, demonstrated what can be accomplished when nations work together. The Montreal Protocol, an international treaty to protect the ozone layer by phasing out ozone-depleting substances, has been highly successful, showing that global environmental agreements can work. The spread of democracy and human rights, while uneven and contested, has expanded freedoms for billions of people. Young people today are growing up with a more global perspective than any previous generation. They are connected to peers around the world, exposed to diverse cultures, and aware of global issues. This generation may be better equipped to think and act globally, to see humanity as a single community rather than divided into competing nations, ethnicities, or religions. The story of how humans became a global civilization is not finished. We are living in the midst of it, shaping it by our choices, both individual and collective. The decisions we make today about technology, environment, economics, governance, culture will determine what kind of global civilization we create. Will it be one that is just and sustainable, that values diversity while recognizing our common humanity, that balances local autonomy with global cooperation? Or will it be marked by deepening inequalities, environmental catastrophes, and conflicts over diminishing resources? The quiet story of us, which began with a small population in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago, has brought us to this moment. A moment where 7 billion, soon to be 8 billion people, inhabit a planet made small by technology and interconnection. We have spread across the earth, created vast civilizations, accumulated knowledge and power beyond what our ancestors could have imagined. We have written the story so far in migrations and settlements, in the domestication of plants and animals, in cities and writing systems, in trade routes and explorations, in industrial machines and digital networks. Now the question is, what will the next chapters hold? The answer depends on us, on our wisdom, our compassion, our ability to cooperate across the divisions that separate us, and our willingness to see ourselves as part of a single human family sharing one fragile planet. The story continues, and we are all, in our own small ways, helping to write it. The night has grown deeper, perhaps, or morning is approaching. The story we have traced, from the first footsteps out of Africa to the digital networks wrapping the globe, is a story of connection. Humans reaching across distances, building bridges, sharing knowledge, creating together what no individual or isolated group could create alone. It is a story still being written, and you are part of it, simply by being here, by being curious, by wondering about the vast sweep of time and space that brought us all to this moment. If these wanderings have brought you some peace or sparked some wonder, remember to share this journey. A simple like or subscribe to the Quiet Science channel helps others find their way here, helps this quiet space exist, one restful mind at a time. Rest now. Tomorrow is another page in the human story, and you will help write it in ways large and small by the life you live and the connections you make. Sleep well. The story continues, as it always has, one quiet step after another, toward a future we are building together.